My name is Jerome Fascione, and I've spent the last 3 decades learning and teaching about African American history. I was raised in a multicultural home where I was taught to seek the truth and work toward justice. You see, it is my belief that through education and the pursuit of truth, we can fix the injustices that exist in the world. I welcome you to Time Out for Black History. We welcome everybody back to another episode of Time Out for Black History. If you remember, this is episode 7, part C. So we talked in part A and part B about the physical legacy of slavery, what slavery was physically, and what slavery was economically. And so in part C, we're going to be looking at the social, the educational, and the political meaning of slavery. Now, the reason why I'm spending a lot of time emphasizing this is I'm going to give you some numbers really quick. So when we use 1640 as a starting point, some would say 1619. I say 1640, that's when legalized chattel slavery became a permanent piece of these American colonies. So if we use 1640 as the starting point, and we go all the way to 2020, and we count that as the time that Black Americans have technically been under the system of slavery until the abolishment in 1865, when we think of those as percentages. So roughly for 60% of time here, Black Americans were relegated to the institution of slavery. 60%. Now, to make this even more powerful, if you throw in segregation, which is also going to limit many of the things we're talking about today, you're talking 1640 all the way to 1964. Now you're talking about for 85% of American history, Blacks have been relegated to some system of slavery or segregation. 85%. So for 15% of our history, Blacks have been equal on paper. I'm not even talking about off paper, socially. I'm talking about on paper in relation to the government and where and how we were seen. So those numbers make what we're talking about, what we talked about with physical and economic, also tied into what we're going to talk about with social, educational, and political. All right, so I wanted to give you those numbers so you understand what we're talking about is a large segment of our time here. We were crippled by the things that we're talking about right now. So the first one I want to talk about is social. So the social aspects of slavery. So when we think about the social, we think about things like slave codes. These were the rules by which slaves had to interact in the world that they existed in. Those included things like curfews. Those included things like travel passes. Those included things like the etiquette associated with how you interacted with your master. Those included things like rules for punishments. All that kind of stuff fell under these slave codes. These slave codes were very vicious in the Deep South. They were somewhat vicious in the Chesapeake colonies. But these codes really dictated what it meant to be a slave. And again, I challenge you to go look up different individual states, what their slave codes were, and the rules in which these individuals had to exist. Okay, now I talk about something that I find even more offensive and more difficult. And that was things like families and what the social structure was within families. So in most places, you didn't choose who you married or who you didn't marry. Marriage was outlawed for slaves. In others, marriage was allowed. And oftentimes it was allowed because slave owners saw it as a way of tying slaves to a more productive environment. If you were a single individual, you didn't have much to live for or lose. If you had a wife and children, you now had something that was of value to you. Now, the problem with this was you being married to your wife didn't protect your wife from the slave master. You having a child with your wife didn't protect your child from the slave master. So you could be sold, your wife could be sold, your child could be sold. So the breakup of the black family has occurred going all the way back to 1640. And it has been a steady piece of black culture ever since, whether it's the slave system, whether it's the system afterward around chain gangs and prison issues. That's always been an issue within the black community. And so I think it's important for us to understand, again, going back, that this isn't a new phenomenon. This is going all the way back to the 1600s, 1700s, and 1800s, this breakup of the black family. So, and again, that's not to dismiss our own part in things also, but to act like this is a issue created by the black community by itself is not intelligent. To understand its origins is important. Okay, and so that's what I really, when I think social, those are the two areas where I really want you to kind of think about it and look at it. Next, we move on to educational. Okay, again, from 1640 until in some places 1965, blacks were denied an education. In 1831, Virginia passed a law that prohibited meetings of people in the instruction of blacks learning how to read. South Carolina had a sentence up to 6 months in prison and a $10,000 fine for white people who tried to educate blacks. Okay, and this isn't even talking about unequal distribution of wealth given to different, as we move through the years. This isn't even talking about the segregation that existed within the colleges that didn't allow blacks to go to college. Luckily, with the creation of Cheyney University, historically black college in the 1830s, 1840s. But again, this is going to be for a segment of the black population. In the South, this is not going to be something that has access. So when you talk about denying an education, and someone might ask, well, why did they not create the laws until the 1820s, 1830s in some of these places? Well, that's when the rhetoric started. That's when we saw abolition begin to increase. That's when we saw many more white people pushing for the education of black Americans. So that's when the power structure had to put in place laws prohibiting that stuff from happening. So when we look today at the educational differences between white Americans and black Americans, come on, man. Read a history book. Understand where this stuff comes from. It's not because blacks are built a certain way. It's because of the way society was created and the way society played out and the laws that were in place and the disadvantages that were there. This isn't a blame game. It's an understanding game. Okay. Lastly, I want to look at political. This one's an easy one. No vote, no ability to hold office, no say in the government, nothing. From 1640 all the way until 1965. Someone say, wait a minute. I thought blacks got the right to vote with the 15th Amendment, right? The 15th Amendment granted the blacks the right to vote. The 14th did, but then the 15th elaborated it. So they did have the right to vote. They did not. Southern states created things like the Grandfather Clause, the 8-box law, literacy tests, poll taxes, all these different ways to prevent, not to mention the Ku Klux Klan standing by the polling booths. So for 85% of our nation's history, black Americans on a whole have been denied the right to participate in the political process. We'll talk a little later about Reconstruction and that nice little 12-year period when blacks saw a lot of progress, but that all quickly disappeared. So think about that. Think about these 5 areas that I've asked you to look at in terms of, for either 60% or 85% of our nation's history, blacks were relegated to a different place. Life doesn't start today. That'd be great if it did. If every day was a new day and every day we got to start over again. but we don't. Life is about the past too. You have to calculate that in. We have to understand what's happening today, we have to understand what happened before us. So I challenge you to research this stuff a little more. Please subscribe to my channel. Please hit that little bell button so you'll know when new updates come out, and share this with other people. Again, the feedback I'm getting is phenomenal, and I'm really enjoying this. You know, there's nothing in it for me. I'm not getting anything out of this except my ability to know that people are becoming more knowledgeable about a topic. And that knowledge will help them relate with other people and understand this world a little bit better and hopefully fix some things. So I can't wait till the next episode. I will see you around the corner, and take care of yourselves.